Sean Maguire said on the show that Iran is the greatest evil. Do you agree?
Yes and no.
Who is?
China, hands down.
Why?
The mindset of the PRC, I think their approach to basic human rights, I think their conducting of an ongoing genocide with their Uyghur population, I think their approach to free speech, to political assembly, to religious freedom are fundamentally antithetical to how the West values human life and how we think about human rights.
Should TikTok be banned in the US?
100% absolutely yesterday, if not years ago.
Ready to go? Matt, I am so excited for this, dude. We get to do it in person.
We get to do it in
so
person.
much more special. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Now, we're in an interesting time. We've obviously just had the election. I just want to start. How do you feel post-election? Are you happy about it, and why?
Yeah, I think there's obviously the election just ended. We're getting results in from some of the kind of congressional races and Senate races. Obviously, President Trump was reelected to a second term. I think there's a couple interesting things here. For me personally, I'm a Democrat. I've been a lifelong Democrat. I've supported Democrats my entire life. I donated to Kamala. I donated to Hillary Clinton. Donated to a number of House Democratic races, Senate Democratic races. Recently hosted a fundraiser for now Senator-elect Adam Schiff of California. So I've supported a lot of sort of left of center national security Dems through my career. So of course, on a personal level, I wish the election had gone differently. That said, I think there's a lot of interesting potential for both Anduril and the defense sector writ large in a new administration. And I think having a new approach, a new mindset, a new approach to innovation, a new approach to funding different defense programs could be pretty interesting. So we'll see how things evolve. We'll see what control of the House and the Senate looks like. And I think for Anduril going forward, I think there's a lot of things, a bright future. The other thing I would add here is that internal to Anduril, we're an apolitical company. We don't talk about personal politics inside the company. We kind of subscribe to the Brian Armstrong Coinbase kind of philosophy of we're here for a mission, and our mission at Anduril is to bring the best technology to the defense sector, period, regardless of who's in the White House, regardless of what party is in control of Congress. So for us internally, it doesn't really matter to the day-to-day life, but externally, of course, perceptions are what they are. So yeah, we have to play the political game and influence where we can.
Do you think Anduril will thrive better in a Trump administration, though, versus a Kamala administration?
Better, I think, is doing a lot of work in that line. I think we were going to succeed under either. We've succeeded under President Biden, we succeeded under President Trump before that. So, yeah, I don't think there's a massive difference to Anduril. Mostly, what we're excited about in a new administration are new appointees who bring different mindsets to defense procurement, a different kind of approach, a recognition that the status quo is not acceptable, a new approach to funding, a new approach to contracting, seeing more urgency, more ambition, kind of the return of capitalism to the defense sector, which has been sorely missing for decades, a rebuilding the American industrial base, relying on cost-plus contracts less and turning to more firm fixed contracts. There's a whole number of different policy approaches that we're pretty optimistic that a new administration is gonna at least take some of that and put into practice.
Speaking of the American industrial base there, we are going to get to kind of supply chains, but I do just want to ask, what changes specifically with regards to China and Taiwan? There's a lot of talk about it. What changes?
In a new Trump administration?
Yeah.
It's a little too early to predict what exact foreign policy pieces are going to change. I think what we would like to see happen is a recognition of and an acknowledgement of what we see as a pretty obvious and emerging conflict around freedom, around democracy, around the rights of citizens to have free speech, free assembly, and to have their voices heard in their own government. A philosophy that I would say does not apply to mainland China or to Russia for that matter as well. So I think a new approach to seeing the emerging threat that's there and then reflecting on kind of the capitalistic and industrial base that relies on China right now and taking an approach that brings a lot of those jobs, a lot of that industry, a lot of that kind of tier 2, tier 3, lower down in the supply chain types of work back to America and our allies, because I think depending on China in the long run's kind of a dicey position to be.
Do you think China will invade Taiwan?
I think that if America does its job and the West and our allies do their jobs, I think no. I think the ambition is there. I think the vision is there. I mean, I was personally sanctioned by China for selling missiles to Taiwan, as was my co-founder Brian Schimpf and a couple other executives in the company itself. So, like, it is pretty clear to me that if China is taking the position that arming Taiwan for their self-defense is an affront to the one China policy and then issuing direct international sanctions as a result of that, pretty clear to me where their ambition lies. Whether that results in an actual straight-up invasion, I think depends largely on the West and our position in posturing to defend Taiwan.
It must be quite a funny conversation with your wife. Like, how was your day? Oh, I just got sanctioned by China.
I was on the Peloton in the morning, just riding, and got a news alert from a Bloomberg story that said Anduril and key executives sanctioned by China, and thought, and the story listed.
You're like, I wonder what Palmer's done now.
I literally thought, oh wow, that's new. That's going to play weird. And it said Anduril and 3 key executives, and I was like, which ones? And then opened the story. It's like, literally found out from a Bloomberg story. Pretty wild.
Darling, we're not going to Beijing this summer.
Exactly. And the sanctions notice, it was kind of a hilarious thing. The sanctions notice said, we're seizing your assets in China and preventing any entry into mainland China, Macau, or Hong Kong. To which the obvious question is like, what assets? I've never been there. I'm not going to go there. I don't own any property there. Like, what the hell are we talking about? It's just this very kind of like posturing kind of PR political message. But then for us, seriously, for Anduril, like, we interpret that both as a sign that, like, we're doing something right. Like, if China is taking that kind of aggressive action towards us, like, we see that as like, we're kind of on the right path here. And then second, I think, is a pretty clear indication of at least their ambitions vis-a-vis Taiwan.
Do you think U.S. attempts to bring back semiconductor kind of manufacturing industry back to U.S. soil will be successful?
I think it has to be. I think it will be. We're already seeing the early results out at the TSMC plant in Arizona that has some pretty good yields that are slightly outperforming the yields of their Taiwan factories. Of course, we'll see how that plays out in the longer run. But yeah, I think it has to work, and I think it will work.
So do you think the threat by China moving forwards will decrease or increase?
I think there's it's a complex question. I think that there's still a lot of supply chain, especially way down in the like tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 levels of supply chain, that still fundamentally rely on Chinese processing, Chinese refining, and Chinese manufacturing.
What is that? I'm so sorry. I'm really naive. I'm a venture investor, so it's my job. But like tier 2, tier 3, tier 4.
Yeah. Okay. So like, if when you buy a phone, inside the phone is a circuit board, and then on that circuit board are some chips, and then inside those chips are individual minerals, individual materials that go into making those chips, right? So like, as you go further down in the supply chain, you get this kind of broader out pyramid, and then in the business, you refer to that as your tier 1 suppliers, or tier 2 suppliers, or tier 3 suppliers, kind of going down into like, how far down into the like actual raw metal coming out of the ground do you want to trace back your supply chain? And too much of that down in the pyramid of the supply chain depends on Chinese processing and Chinese mining, especially around rare earth minerals and rare earth elements like magnets, which means motors. A lot of the underlying components that go into silicon chips, a lot of that is still going through China. So if you think about a kind of a Cold War, which to me I think it's pretty obvious that we're in, escalating into a hot war, and then you think about like, okay, well, every drone needs electric motors. Every missile needs semiconductors to help kind of control the flight dynamics and the aiming and the avionics and all of that. Far enough down that supply chain, you start looking at like, oh man, those individual resistors, those come from China. That individual fastener, that raw metal comes from China. So I think it's very, very, very hard in practice to actually completely divorce yourself from any Chinese influence on the supply chain whatsoever. Nonetheless, I think if a Cold War escalates to a hot war, like, we as the West writ large need to be in a position where we either have stockpiled enough to make it through a conflict, or where we have developed ideally our own supply chains for those individual components.
What would lead to a Cold War becoming a hot war?
A few things that could happen. I think you could see North Korea get spicier. I think you could see a invasion of Taiwan that would get very spicy. I think you could see Russian expansionism vis-a-vis Ukraine kind of keep pushing into Eastern Europe, and I think it's a pretty hot topic in Europe these days that would get pretty spicy and escalate. And then I also think freedom of movement of ships and commercial traffic through the South China Sea, like a massive amount of our livelihood depends on ships moving in and out of the Chinese South China Sea. So I think if you started to see like freedom of navigation get compromised, that could pretty quickly escalate into a hot war. But like vis-a-vis Anduril, like what we see is that deterrence of long-term hot war conflict ultimately comes through strength, and that there is a weakness begets hot wars. So from our perspective, we view it as we want to equip our military, the militaries of the UK, the West, our allies, Australia, et cetera, with the best possible technology to make the cost of escalating into a hot war for our enemies, for our opponents, prohibitively expensive. That's kind of the idea. It's kind of the vision. That's what we started the company to do, and it's what we're building towards.
You mentioned Russia, Ukraine. It is we're obviously in Europe. It's a very prescient and important topic. How do you foresee that playing out over the next few years?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. My guess is that, and it's a complete conjecture here. I have no insider information whatsoever, but my guess is that we see some sort of détente or some sort of negotiated settlement take place probably over the next year would be my guess. And if I had to bet, it looks something like Russia annexing a chunk of eastern Ukraine, more or less along the line of conflict where the line has, for better or worse, kind of held for the last year or so, and that then the war kind of de-escalates and everybody goes back to rebuilding. But again, pure conjecture. I don't really know.
Do you think Trump will be able to bring the two parties together and form a resolution, as he said very clearly? If it was me, I would have ended it in days,
Yeah, political proclamations like that are easy to make on a campaign stage and hard in practice. We'll see. I mean, I'm optimistic that he'll be able to find a resolution. I think in practice it's actually pretty hard.
Final one, and then I want to get to the business itself. Israel, Gaza, again, another incredibly prescient one. I have, riots outside my apartment every weekend protesting against it.
You should move to a better neighborhood.
Marylebone is not terrible, but it's very, very kind of prescient in London. What happens there?
I mean, from our perspective, I guess from my perspective personally, the whole thing's pretty tragic, and I think if I were on the Palestinian side, I probably would rethink invading your neighbor and abducting and torturing and ultimately murdering civilian hostages. I think what we end up seeing is the ultimately kind of the near and total sort of conquering of Gaza, and we end up seeing the kind of Palestinian people hopefully appreciating that terror and violence isn't the way forward for their society. And
do you think Israel is wrong in their response?
I don't at all. No, absolutely not. Personally stand with them, and we as a company do too.
Strong.
I think it's pretty clear. I mean, I think it's a pretty clear position to take. It's like you cannot expect a country to sit idly by while your neighbors lob missiles over the border into your cities, hitting apartment buildings, hitting shops, hitting homes. To say nothing of staging an actual hostile invasion over the border and massacring civilians, and you can't expect them to stand by and watch that happen and do nothing. War is tragic. The outcomes are terrible, and you see the pictures that come out of it. You see the videos that come out of it. Yeah, it's objectively terrible.
As crass and as awful as this sounds, is war not good for business?
War is not good for business. War is not good for humanity. Like what we want to do is deter war. What you want to do is to have a very big stockpile that you never have to fire. That's ideal.
You are the biggest insurance premium to governments. I totally understand that. You mentioned, hey, we want to bring the latest technology and we want to equip the Western governments to feel that they have this power and that they can leverage it if needed. How is software and autonomy transforming defense?
Oh, man. We could talk about this for hours here. I think it's a totally transformative. I mean, I know you spend a lot of time on your podcast talking about AI as it applies to enterprise companies, as it applies to SaaS companies, as it applies to customer service, like all of these different verticals, all these different areas. And defense is no different. I think the future around AI is incredibly bright. I think there's a lot of opportunity to optimize everything from production to field support to maintenance to understanding the landscape of what the battlefield looks like. That's really what we're doing with our Lattice operating system that's at the core of all of our products, is trying to bring together and fuse all of this different data that's coming from individual soldiers, from individual planes, from satellites, from submarines, from missiles, from every kind of sensor that you might have out there in a battle space, fuse that into one picture so that the soldiers and the commanders who are ultimately controlling the battle space have a live real-time view of what's happening out there. I think there's a tremendous amount of impact that this is going to have. So when we think about new products, we look at like what is currently existing, what the 5-year kind of program needs are, and like these documents are public. You can go find these documents, these kind of 5-year vision documents that each of the services put together, and you could say like, okay, well, what's currently there? What do we see as the missing gap? What do we think we can have that's kind of unique to the market here? And then let's go invent, let's go create. So I think there's a whole world of innovation that's going to come from really bringing these kind of software first, AI-driven kind of principles into the defense sector that's traditionally lagged, especially on software.
How do you think about them building a faster horse? And what I mean by that is if you're following 5-year vision docs, you're just kind of, oh, they want that, and so we'll align our product roadmap to that, versus governments are largely inefficient. They change every 4 years, so I don't know how they have a 5-year vision doc.
Yep.
They're mostly run by people who've never actually had a job. I mean, you sound like the shittest customers ever.
Yeah.
How do you think about like actually leading the way, showing what technology can do, and prioritizing what to build first?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. I think first of all, it's a slight misnomer and a slight misunderstanding that the whole personnel changes over every 4 years. That's just fundamentally untrue. The political leaders at the top and some of the political appointees at the top, yes, those do tend to change with administrations, and sometimes they change more often. I mean, there's like an average tenure, something like 2.5 years for a lot of these positions. So
we had a prime minister that didn't last longer than a cabbage.
Yeah, pretty famously on a Twitter feed, right? See, if you use these lights with the cabbage, it ages faster, right? So
does she.
Yeah, exactly. Good joke. So I think there's like a slight misunderstanding that like, oh, the entirety of the Pentagon turns over every 4 years. It's just fundamentally not true. And same here in MOD Main on Whitehall. It doesn't turn over with every administration end to end. So I think that these longer-term vision documents written by military officers and civil servants within these organizations like largely do hold for where they want to see the capabilities of the Navy or the Air Force go in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next decade. But to your point, like, yeah, we consistently, even in the technology sector, we consistently underestimate the pace of innovation, and we consistently underestimate the pace at which software especially is going to continue to rapidly kind of develop and accelerate. And like nobody would have predicted the wave of AI and then AI applications hitting the market even as recent as like 3 years ago. Like no one would have seen this kind of massive wave coming. So I think that there is a middle ground, because if we invent and have an idea for some sort of crazy out of the box left field sort of kind of construct, and then we come to the Pentagon and say, hey, we think you should do X. And if X completely and totally doesn't align even at all with where they want to take the capability, it can be kind of a hard sell. There are parts of the organization that are meant for doing sort of these like futuristic kind of expansive types of things. So that's one angle, is that we can just kind of go pitch something, convince them, and go that way. The other angle we can take is we can just do it. And I think that this is part of our strength, where we've raised a pretty good amount of venture capital money. We have incredible broad freedom on what we can do with that money. So like if we have an idea of a new capability, a new type of missile, a new type of drone, a new type of submarine, like we can just go do that.
And then you show them.
And then show them.
Yeah.
And then say, beyond just like, oh, hey, here's a PowerPoint slide, which is what they've been pitched for the last 40 years, of how this new potential thing, if you fund me, if you give me that money on a cost-plus basis, surely I can hire enough engineers and I can design this for you. Here's my PowerPoint slide of what it would look like. We can shortcut all of that and just say like, hey, so we've built a couple, and I can come out to my test range. I'll be glad to show you how they work. Here's how they talk to the other systems you have. Here's how they talk to the planes you already have. Here's how they talk to the drones you already have. Like, we think this is pretty compelling. It's what's called a con-op in our business. Here's a pretty kind of compelling con-op how you'd use this technology. Like, let's give it a go.
I was speaking to a defense entrepreneur the other day, and they said the thing you will consistently overestimate is the intelligence and the intellect of government buying organizations.
Yeah.
They largely don't know what AI is, Harry. And so it is a uphill battle selling into them.
Yeah.
Is that a fair picture of government buying knowledge?
I mean, in insulting your customer and expecting them to buy from you is usually a kind of a dicey proposition. So no, I don't think it's totally fair. I think there's a worldview piece here that we as Silicon Valley kind of entrepreneurs tend to underestimate, where it is our jobs, literally, it is your job, literally, to go meet the most brilliant, adventurous, entrepreneurial, creative folks on the planet. That's your job. And then pick which ones of them you want to invest in, which ones of them you think have the best opportunity to go make their vision a reality. Of course, that is not the job of a DoD bureaucrat and a procurement officer. That's fundamentally not the job. And you also have to think about a kind of a risk-reward kind of incentive system that they're operating under. And to be clear, I'm not defending the system. I'm thinking there's a perception and an understanding problem that has to happen here. So from the perspective of a procurement officer, if they take a flyer, they take a bet like you do on a prospective new company, and then that company totally implodes, for you as a venture capitalist, you think well, that's 80% of my companies that are ultimately probably going to fail, and I'm hoping for the other 10% to return my money, and I'm hoping for 10% of them to be big home runs and return the fund. That's your business of a power law business. That's not the business of a procurement official. It's fundamentally not. They have to put technology and tools and weapons and bullets and bottled water and cots and medical kit and fuel. They have to put that in the hands of soldiers in harm's way every day. So when someone comes along and is like, I have a genius idea about AI, for them, they're thinking, yeah, okay, maybe that sounds pretty crazy, but I've kind of got to just put bullets in the hands of my soldiers.
So do we need to change the incentive mechanism?
100% we do. We absolutely do. So there's just
how do you do
I think
that?
it's kind of pithy to be yeah, those independent, they're all just idiots. It's no, they're not. They're not. They're just operating under a different incentive structure, a different reward scheme, a different kind of careerist kind of mentality that for those of us in Silicon Valley, entrepreneurs and VCs and investors alike, it's just a fundamentally different kind of worldview. So I think what you have to do is understand where they're coming from and then translate to them, okay, here I have this core technology. Here's how it could actually impact the lives and the capabilities of your soldiers in conflict. Here's how we'd field it. Let me show that to you. Let me go do the work that's often pretty painful. And you talk to a lot of enterprise entrepreneurs and enterprise investors. It's there's a headline that makes sense. You're bringing X innovation to the enterprise, and then when you actually get into the weeds of enterprise implementation, it's really hard. Really hard.
This is what every AI entrepreneur says, though, which is there is a very large chasm between purchase and implementation.
My goodness, yes.
And that has not been anywhere near closed.
No, and even closed, understood. Understood. I mean, you talk to plenty of entrepreneurs who come in here and say AI is totally going to transform X corporate infrastructure, totally going to transform accounting. We won't need accountants anymore. I've heard that pitch a couple of times, and you're like, really?
So I'm putting you now in charge of the MOD, the DoD, you name your Department of Defense style. What would you do to create a structure of incentives that creates risk-taking mindsets for the people buying?
Yeah, a few things, man. First of all, would appreciate the urgency of the problem. And I think that over the last, call it decade, I think that the governments of the West have largely gotten complacent to what we view as the kind of the major geopolitical strategic problems facing the West, especially vis-a-vis China and to a slightly lesser extent Russia. So appreciating the urgency, I think, is point number one. Point number two, I would say, is bringing capitalism back to the defense sector. My former boss and now friend and mentor Sham, who you've had, Sham Sankar at Palantir, who you've had on the show, he's been on a tear lately talking about this, and he had this tweet that I think perfectly encapsulates it, where he said that everyone, including Russia and China, have given up on communism, except Cuba and the DoD. And it's like that's kind of the mentality, right? It's like a mentality of a cost plus style contracting. I'll get to that in a second, where like ultimately a competitive win, a better technology, a better approach doesn't always necessarily win out. And like oftentimes there are different incentives at play that lead to a little bit more of a kind of communistic or socialistic approach to the defense sector that I think is fundamentally bad and is ultimately squeezing out kind of the crazy entrepreneurs and the crazy inventors from working in the sector. So the third point that I would change would be way less cost plus contracting, way less cost plus contracting, moving many more things to firm fixed price, and then being comfortable
Just for those that don't understand, what is cost plus contracting?
Oh, man. So if you've spent any time around lawyers or accountants or folks of that type that bill by the hour, so what happens on these large defense procurements is that one of these prime contractors will come in and they will pitch a PowerPoint slide about how they would do something. And then they hire engineers to build to that vision. Then they bill those engineers to the government at an hourly rate with a fixed margin. So that's a cost plus. So it costs us this. There's a fixed margin on top of that. And then they charge that back to the government up to the limit of the particular program budget. So what ends up happening, and it's like I started with lawyers and accountants for a reason, is like when you incentivize someone to work by the hour,
takes time.
It will take more time. And when you incentivize somebody to work by a firm fixed price, it'll go a whole lot shorter. So it's like if you take those fundamental incentives and then you extrapolate that to the entirety of the industry, there's actually not a lot of incentive for the existing prime contractors to make the plane cheaper or faster. It's just fundamentally not the incentive. What they're incentivized to do, given that their profit margins are ultimately driven by how high they can drive the cost up because they get a firm fixed margin on top of that cost, then you get the behavior that you incentivize. And I think like if you look at some of the statistics and some of the performance of these companies, honestly, it's kind of hard to blame them. It genuinely is. Like the stock performance of the top 5 defense primes in the U.S. is wildly outperforms the S&P 500. I have the statistics right here. I wrote them down.
What are they? I don't know these.
Yeah, so Northrop Grumman over the last 15 years has had a total compounded annual shareholder return of just over 20%. Lockheed and Boeing are just behind them at about 15%. The S&P 500 over the exact same time period has an 11.6% total compounded annual return.
But, I'm sorry.
I'm
about
really
this, it's
naive.
like why is that when they have a shitty structure of cost plus that doesn't really incentivize them to be that innovative? I'm struggling to understand those premiums.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the light bulb going off. So what's happening is that the incentive structure within the Pentagon, within the procurement office, has said like, well, this is how we prefer to do business because we don't want to have our companies make too much money. So this firm fixed margin is something like 8%, 9%, 10%, thereabouts, depending on the particular contract. So that's how they've structured many of their large procurements, including the F-35, including large submarine programs, have all been designed under this kind of cost-plus type structure. So what the defense primes have gotten very good at is they've gotten very good at figuring out ways to take their overhead kind of corporate costs, including their buildings, including their HR departments, their finance departments, their legal departments, kind of all of these, their IT infrastructure, all of that, bundling that into that cost number on the beginning part of the equation, then taking that firm fixed kind of price margin markup on top of that, such that that free cash flow that comes off of that contract is like actually pretty free. So then the companies perform financially very well. Including some wild stats about stock buybacks and dividends. Like last year alone, Lockheed Martin, 2023 numbers, Lockheed Martin spent $6 billion on stock buybacks. They only spent $1.5 billion on IRAD, which is called internal R&D, their own at-risk funding of research and development. They spent 4 times the amount of money on stock buybacks than they did on at-risk research and development. That's wild. That's wild. That's completely upside down from how any technology company, how any software company, how any Silicon Valley type company operates.
I don't understand that.
And the reason that they're doing that is because that's the incentive structure that exists within government procurement and is rewarding that kind of behavior. So what I'm trying to propose in a new administration, kind of a new worldview, a new approach to these contracts is like, stop funding that. It's not working. Like you're not getting the best technology in the hands of soldiers. But fundamentally what you are getting is you are getting technology that is 2 or 3 generations behind Because by the time you go from a requirements document to a PowerPoint proposal document to hiring the engineers to developing the thing on a cost-plus basis, which takes exactly as long as you think it would, very long time, and then into a fielding and then ultimately into a support mechanism for that whole procurement, by definition, you're operating on requirements that are a decade, 15 years old. They're 2 or 3 cycles behind where the current state of the art is.
So how long is it from like first deck to deployment there, and how long is it with you?
Yeah, so it can be upwards of 15, 20 years to go from first requirements document to full fielding of a system, which is way longer than most Silicon Valley companies have been alive. So it's just a wild amount of time.
But it's like
I'm really enjoying your face right now. This is
But I'm just
great.
like confused because, like, if you think about a conflict in Afghanistan, the terrain and the geography of a climate will drastically change the type of equipment that you need.
No, I mean, if you remember in the early days of the Iraq War, we sent American soldiers and British soldiers into conflict in Iraq in soft-sided Humvees, where they were just like bullets coming through the canvas on the side, because it was just a different kind of war. We were equipped for a different kind of conflict. And then over the course of the 20 years that we were at both of those conflicts, we innovated and developed these MRAPs, these kind of mine-resistant vehicles. We put armor on all of the Humvees. We totally transformed. We had a lot of like IED defeat.
Is it possible to have 6 to 12 month cycles, or am I totally dreaming in that world?
6 to 12 months would be very hard. I think that underestimates the kind of logistics, fielding, supply chain kind of piece of it. That's like getting technology into the hands of these soldiers forward and then training all of them, supporting them with maintenance, like, trucks break, planes break, you need to replace things, hard landings, you need to replace landing gear, whatever it is. There's a whole kind of tail of like that's pretty hard. So 6, 12 months is very hard. I think a 2-3 year cycle is extremely believable, especially if you architect your products to be pretty modular, if you architect your products to be upgrade friendly, if you if you design your products around a software kind of mentality where you can, thinking similarly to how Tesla approaches their fleet of cars with their over-the-air updates pushing pretty frequently. Like if you take a software first approach to a lot of the products, I think you can get a lot shorter than a 5, 10, 15, 20 year kind of life cycle. But 12 months, I think, would be pretty hard.
I just have to go back to classic VC wanting it now. I live in like 10-year IPO cycles, so I'm like 6 to 12 months would be great. You mentioned the market there and the kind of the primes being kind of structured the way they are. Is this not a bad market? Forgive me, in the way that I was trained on the winner take all, winner will accrue 95% of the value and the second will take 5% of the value. The very structure of this market kind of denotes that actually no government is going to say 100% buys with Anduril.
Yep.
They will always be pretty scattered.
No, and we wouldn't propose that.
And they'll always be pretty scattered. Mm-hmm. And so does that go against the idea of winner take all? And is this market good as a result?
So, a couple of questions kind of baked into one there. First, I don't think there will ever be a kind of venture-style dynamic of a winner-take-all. I don't think this is a situation of like Google versus Yahoo where one is the obvious dominant winner by 10x and then there's the other rands. I don't think that's going to be anywhere close to the case in overall defense spending. So kind of goes against that thesis, sure. The inverse of that is that it is a gigantic market and it is a long, enduring market. And for me personally, an incredibly impactful and incredibly important market to bring innovation to. To wit, I have a couple of stats here to throw at you. In 2024 alone, U.S. is spending about $880 billion on defense. The UK is spending about $73 billion more. The EU member countries are spending almost $300 billion on top of that. Australia is spending $45 billion on top of that. And that's before we start talking about other partner nations like Japan or like Taiwan or Middle Eastern allies or any of that. That's purely just looking at like this year's spending. It's like over $1 trillion, almost $1.5 trillion in spending. It's a big number. So clearly I'm not saying like, oh man, the total addressable market for Anduril is $1.5 trillion a year. It's not. Like a lot of that goes into salaries, a lot of it goes into healthcare, goes into like, food and feeding. Like, of course there's a lot of complexity to that. My point is just that this isn't a kind of new emerging sort of like, oh, I wonder what that growth sector is going to look like. It's not that at all. It's a like big, enduring, very reliable sector. The other thing I would say, kind of bringing it back around to the kind of political positioning where we started the conversation, is that defense spending has like largely remained fairly flat and kind of grown pretty predictably, almost linearly over Republican administrations, Democratic administrations, same in the UK for what it's worth. So from a perspective of like, do we think our customers will be there buying important technology in 5 years? Of course they will be. So yeah, I think there's a couple of pieces. One is like, I don't see it as a true winner take all. I don't see it as like Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop, Raytheon, et cetera. We're going to take all of them down. I don't see that at all. I think it's going to be like we're going to become the sixth prime alongside them, and that there's still plenty of food to eat.
How much did the US spend?
880.
880.
Yeah.
Wow. How much did the UK spend?
73.
73.
Graham outside is sweating right now because he's the one who pulled these statistics. So we're going to hope they're right.
Okay, so don't worry, it's a venture podcast. We're very, very rarely right.
Yeah.
It's a prediction market.
And then
after all.
EU was 295 on top of that.
Okay, but let's look at that. 880 versus
Yep.
73. That is 8% or 8.5%. Is the US spending too much or is the UK spending too little?
UK spending too little by a wide order of magnitude.
What should it be?
Should be closer to the 2.5–3% of GDP that everyone's committed that they should be spending on NATO. So it should be, my guess is like 50% higher than that. And then more importantly than a particular dollar amount, they should be spending it more efficiently. And the UK, like the US, is not.
Well, I think about 2% of UK GDP now is about $10, so I wouldn't be too hopeful on that
Your
one.
comment, not mine.
But my question to you is, was Trump right then in suggesting that the EU should be spending a lot more
Yes.
and the US should be spending less on EU defense?
Yes, absolutely.
What happens then with your five primes there? Respectfully, if they're doing buybacks and not investing in R&D, I mean this in the nicest way, do they consider Anduril a threat, do you think?
I think they would consider our approach to technology development to be a threat to their style of technology development and their style of production. Yes. I don't think they view us as Anduril, it's ourselves. I don't think they're thinking of us every morning. I do think they view the cost plus versus firm fixed mindset as being particularly impactful to them. And in fact, a few of them have come out in their recent annual reports and quarterly calls and whatnot and said that they're walking away from cost plus from firm fixed contracts. They won't do firm fixed contracts anymore. It's too risky for them. Yeah.
Wow.
It's an interesting gambit, isn't it?
Yeah, why?
I don't know. Can't speak for them.
Fascinating. Fuckers. Will we see the nationalization of different providers? And what I mean by that is like we have Anduril in the US, we have Helsing in Europe. Will we have favored purchasing by those nations?
Oh, we already do.
We already do?
We already do, yeah, for sure. And there's an agenda within each of these countries, within Australia, within UK. This isn't anything particularly new. Like the British government, like the US government, or like the Australian government, wouldn't be comfortable taking British taxpayer dollars and funneling them straight to Anduril US in California to buy new kit or new technology or new drones or new missiles. So one of the kind of strategic moves we have made is to invest in teams and engineers and production capacities in each of these countries, including the UK, so that UK taxpayer dollars get spent within the UK to manufacture UK variants of a particular product that we make. We will see this in every country. So the thesis is basically taking core IP and then localizing it to work with, your radio standards, your existing platforms like helicopters or planes or drones or warships or whatever that requires like a little bit of customization. That's just a slightly different platform, slightly different technology. So we adapt it into the UK standard and then manufacture it here, deploy it here, support it here, field it here with British citizens based here in England. Kind of a like sovereignty agenda is what they would call it.
What percent of your budget is R&D?
Our budget?
Yeah.
Oof.
I'm just wondering comparatively to the 1.5% of one of your primes.
Yeah, we spend. I'd have to get you the firm number. The number I'm gonna throw out is gonna be
range-wise. Is it like 10 to 15%?
Oh no. It's like 60-70%. It's a huge number. It's a huge number. Like Anduril, we're doing very well financially. This year, revenue's off the charts, and then we reinvest every single nickel of that right back into future growth, future programs, all of that. So like we're still EBITDA negative as you'd expect for a growth stage startup like us. But we spend a massive percent of our revenue.
I think it's super easy to bash incumbents.
Of course it is.
And everyone does it.
Yeah.
What did you learn?
This is the venture capital community. Of course we do. Everyone who has come before is, of course.
Shit. What did you learn from them that they've done well that you actually want to take with you?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think there's a political piece of this that I think we have a lot of lessons to learn on impacting the appropriations process, impacting the legislative process, having our voice heard in different kind of policy approaches coming out of Congress and coming out of the Pentagon. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. I think there are good lessons to be learned, especially on what in our business was kind of referred to as MRO, is essentially the long logistics tail that comes with deploying one of these products. Unlike a Silicon Valley software company where you hit upgrade on the cloud servers and then whoa, all your customers have a new version. Just fundamentally not how our business works, where we have soldiers using our products deployed all over the world, and you can't just click a button and magically upgrade everything. You can upgrade some here, upgrade some here, upgrade some here. There's like a real kind of logistics and fielding piece there that, to be honest, as of today, they're better at than we are. So I think we have a lot to learn there. And then the last piece that I think is kind of an interesting one, and might get us to some other interesting conversation topics, is I think they've done a really good job at appealing to a patriotic sort of kind of current, and influencing folks who want to come work and have defend their country and be patriotic and kind of influence the national defense sector, and kind of encouraging them to come work on these problems. I think they've done a really good job at, like, they hire a lot of people. They have a lot of employees. They have a lot of offices. They have a lot of production factories. They have a lot of kind of folks who work there who believe a mission and a vision. And I think there's something to be taken from that.
If we're being blunt, do the most ambitious technology-oriented people want to go and work at Lockheed?
No.
So have they done a good job at that?
I think they have done I think you kind of have to bifurcate a little bit, right? Because there's an ambitious AI software engineer type of mentality, and then there's a production assembly line fielding training type of mentality. They're different people. So I think they have in a certain category, and I think that's where we have some learnings to take.
What have you not done that you wish you had done? My
joke comment is that if I only make 2 mistakes before lunch, it's a good day. So it's like there's a lot of things I would say. I think a couple of things. I think taking a stronger corporate position on remote work is a frequent topic within your podcast and your world.
You wish you'd said no to it?
Wish we had taken a more definitive negative stance, yes. Yes.
What did you do? You just took a laissez-faire?
We have I wouldn't say laissez-faire, no. We have a default in-office first kind of approach. It's hard, basically impossible, to run a hardware company in a fully remote capacity. It comes down to it. Somebody has to turn the wrench and build the thing. So like a full remote kind of hardware company is kind of a contradiction in terms. But we, especially through COVID and then through kind of the spreading of people with COVID and then trying to get people back, it has been harder for us to get that kind of core group back together. So I wish we'd been more definitive. We should have been more definitive, yeah. In the earlier days of that kind of evolution. In our defense, I don't think any of us saw the COVID pandemic lasting as long as it did. I don't think any of us foresaw the kind of the distribution of folks around the country in the way that it played out. But no, I wish we'd taken a more definitive stance.
What did you do that you wish you hadn't done?
Oh man, there's a few things I would say here. First thing is I made a conscious decision about a little over a year and a half ago, to attempt to non-linearly scale our G&A support functions. So things like our business systems team that does our internal tooling, our HR team, our people business partners, kind of support their managers in their organization, our IT operations team, our facilities team. And what we were trying to achieve is a non-linear kind of return on those types of heads. Like, can we build in automation? Can we utilize AI? Can we take a different kind of approach than a traditional type of company that ultimately will get to a stronger kind of cost margin profile if we can kind of condense that G&A segment of the spend. And that was just a shit decision.
Why? I mean, it seems highly logical. Rational.
It seems logical, and it sounds on paper. It sounds like the kind of thing that a McKinsey consultant would tell you on paper to condense spend. I think in particular on two areas, it really kind of hampered our growth and was a long-term strategic mistake, which we're correcting, to be clear. But looking back, I wish we hadn't done this. First is on the business systems side, and this is kind of gets to one of my favorite quotes. I literally have this printed on my wall in my office. Is the Elon quote about production, and I want to get the quote right. I have it written. Is the extreme difficulty of scaling production of new technology is not well understood. It's 1,000% to 10,000% harder than making a few prototypes. And the machine that makes the machine is really the genius and is really the hard part of getting full systems into production. And he tweeted this. I could send you the tweet after if you're curious. But what that means is there's a lot of guts to running a company, a big hardware company like us, that are completely unappreciated by the average, certainly venture capitalist or investor, let alone the public, that goes into supply chain management, kind of the procurement management, the sales and operations planning, which gets into literally the guts of how many fasteners should I buy? How many brackets should I buy? How many sensors should I buy? Into the kind of pipeline planning. This is sort of the whole CRM side of things, into the back-end financial engine that kind of makes all of that work that ultimately your auditors have to interact with to, stamp an audit at the end of the year.
Was it obvious that this was a mistake?
No, it's obvious now. It wasn't
but
obvious
at the time.
Not at the time. It wasn't. No. So what we should have done at the time is take a big swing and say, we're going to make massive investments in ultimately headcount and then platform spend, kind of the tools that those folks build, to build a unified kind of operating system here. We're doing that now. We announced this publicly. It's called Arsenal OS. We've hired a whole bunch of heads, but in retrospect, I should have done that 2 years ago, and we'd be in a much stronger position now.
How do you think about your relationship to regret?
Oh, man.
Do you regret things, or are you very forward-thinking? It doesn't matter, fuck it.
I think that anybody who tells you they have no regrets is lying, and they're trying to put on a face. They're trying to pretend. I think there's a difference between sorrowful regret and introspective, reflective regret. And I think for me, I'm incredibly introspective. I'm incredibly self-critical. I like to joke around Anduril that I'm our harshest critic. And I actually view it as part of my job to be continually pushing to do better, to go faster, to be more perfectionist.
Do you worry about the impact that has on culture? I'm the same.
100%.
Because nothing's ever good enough, and nothing's ever fast enough, and nothing's ever right. And even when it is, it's well, that's what I said it should have been.
Yeah. No.
But that's not great for teams.
It's good for high-performing teams. It's not great for shit teams.
Sure, but high-performing teams still need Matt. That's awesome. Well done.
Yeah, sure. You can do both, though, is kind of my meta point, right? So it's it is very possible to have a customer demo go very well and have the customer walk away and be like, man, that was great. I'm really excited. Look forward to meeting next week, talking about pricing and next steps. This is really great. Thanks for taking the time. And they walk out and they close the door, get in the car and drive away. And to turn around and be like, whew, all right, great job, team. Let's talk about the 3 things we can do better next time. That's absolutely totally doable. You can both celebrate your achievements and your successes and aim higher and better next time. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. And I think if anything, and this tends to happen a lot in the Valley and certainly amongst VC world, is like a navel gazing at like how amazing you are and a self-puffery of like, we're the best. Like, first of all, like hubris kills everybody in the long run. So you can't have that. And second of all is just objectively false. Like in any individual circumstance, you are always misplaying things. To wit, like I guarantee at the end of this, I'm going to listen to this interview no less than 4 times, making notes of different tacks I could have taken or different points I should have made or different arguments I could have gone down. And less because I'm neurotic, more because the next time I want to do better. And I think that like you can take that mindset, you can take that approach and bring that to everything from our facilities, to our IT stack, to our recruiting process, to our technology development, to our manufacturing process, to our demos, to our customer trainings, to our fieldings, to our field support, like literally everything. As a company, we should be in a position where we say like, okay, great, we achieved that milestone. What can we do better next time? What's the learning? What should we change?
Is a good decision today always better than a perfect decision tomorrow?
I know this gets thrown around the valley a lot. In the general case, yes. However, I think that point is kind of hyperbolic. If the decision is truly, genuinely tomorrow, and there's new information that is coming today, waiting for tomorrow is better. That's in practice, that's not actually the point that the question is trying to get at. The point that the question is trying to get at is like over-analyzing, over-data collecting, driving to consensus amongst large committees over many, 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 many months, getting to a groupthink decision at the end, is always net worse than making a quick decision, seeing the impact of it, learning from it, and then maybe changing course, maybe changing tact completely. Almost always delaying's worse.
How much money have you raised to this point? Give or take.
Give or take. Do you include debt in that?
Pre and post?
Short of debt, it would be about $4 billion. With debt, it'd be about $5 billion.
Okay, so $4 to $5 billion. Who runs the fundraise process?
It's changed over the years. So in the early days, and this is because our investor profile has changed over the years too. And surely you have the notes of who's led each round and who's participated in each round. In the early days, it was exclusively Trey who would run our fundraising processes, and he would put Palmer or me or Brian or some of our key engineers in front of investors at the right time to kind of get to whatever questions they had or whatever their concerns were. But really, it was like orchestrated by Trey. I was always managing kind of the back office process of it, kind of the collecting of signatures, getting the legal docs done, getting kind of all of the like kind of mechanics of it. But really, the framing of it, the pricing, the structure is all Trey driven. In the later years, the more recent years, that's shifted to our CFO, Babak, who's incredible. And he's just coming out of his public shell a little bit. He did a roundtable at Ramp that was really good. But in the latest couple of rounds, including our debt round, that was entirely driven by Babak.
Do you think you've raised enough? You've been lean. You could have done more. You've had wasted rounds in certain respects.
Depends on your philosophy, I suppose.
If you had the time again, could you have done the same on 2?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think there are certainly individual R&D efforts that haven't gone the way we wanted. That, with the benefit of hindsight, you'd say, I would have cut bait there earlier.
What was the biggest R&D fail?
I'm not going to talk about them publicly. There are a few internally that we've had that we put some meat behind and ultimately didn't pan out. And you cut bait and you move on and take some lessons, and maybe you have an engine that's interesting, or you have a control technique that's interesting. You can apply it to a new product. But we've had a couple. I don't think I would say, we could have done this on half as much money. No, not at all. I mean, if anything, I think we should raise more and go faster.
I spoke to a founder the other day who said the hardest thing that I face today is 2 classes of citizens within my companies. Mm-hmm. Those that take secondaries and those that haven't. Mm-hmm. And kind of the OGs who have been there and deservedly have.
Yep.
How did you think about the secondary decision?
Which secondary decision?
Well, in terms of the ability to let people take secondaries, how much, how to provision that. I don't know how to say this nicely. Anduril has a lot of investors through different SPVs and family offices, and it's like the amount of Anduril investors I've met is a lot.
Yeah. How many of them are lying?
Do you know what? I think a lot of it is, hey, one person did an SPV and got 25 investors for it.
Yep.
And that then leads to 25 people saying I'm an investor.
Yep. And there's a fair amount of kind of noise on the secondaries about an SPV of an SPV of an SPV.
There's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
I mean, SpaceX had a similar thing. They still do have a similar thing, right?
For sure. How do you feel about that? How do you think about that internally? Is it something you want to lock down?
I think there's two sides of it that they're kind of conflicting. One side of it is that I am a very big believer in providing employees with the opportunity and the freedom to make a choice about whether being full pot committed 100% in or take a little bit off the table is best for them and their family. I'm a father of 3 kids, and like we live in Southern California and life is expensive, and Anduril shares don't pay the daycare bills. So like I totally 100% appreciate someone who's in a position where they're saying like, hey, if I sell 20% of my position off, or I sell 10% of my position off, that'll fundamentally change kind of my quality of life, and it'll lead to, a marked improvement in my home life, which, ultimately will make me more kind of committed and happy here, and it'll be less tempting to go leave for a higher cash kind of compensation somewhere else. Like, totally get that. And I believe in the rights and the kind of ability of individuals to make that decision. So on the one side, I'm like, yeah, secondaries are a good thing. Like, you want these folks to be able to have that freedom. And it's worth noting that every time we've done one of these structured tenders, we've had a relatively low participation rate in them, somewhere in the like 30% range of the percent of shares that could have been sold that were eligible to be sold, that folks actually did sell. So like a fairly low blended average of folks who are selling their shares off, which I take as a great sign that employees are very excited and very long. The inverse of that is the chaos of the secondary market, and I think my reputation for hating the chaos of the secondary market's pretty well deserved. I think there's a lot of what I would describe as pretty scummy behavior that happens in the secondary markets. Where
what is the scummy behavior?
So these SPV brokers who are, I get why they exist. They are operating with very low information. Like, Anduril has never once ever approached an SPV broker and said, hey, here are our detailed financials. Here's our detailed strategy. Let me avail our management team for different interviews or different kind of sessions. They are operating off of a very limited set of basically headlines, which are almost always wrong, and then turning around to investors who are either desperate or just sort of kind of carefree and saying like, I got an opportunity to invest in Anduril or SpaceX or OpenAI or whatever other kind of hot company that they've been able to wiggle some access into. Here are a couple of headline numbers. A lot of those investors don't understand the fee structures that they're getting into. A lot of those investors don't understand even the structure of carried interest and what that looks like. And so what is fundamentally happening is you get a representation of bad numbers to kind of like relatively unsophisticated investors on the other end, who are paying usually pretty steep premiums to the kind of what we would describe as the fair market price, with usually pretty ugly layered fees on that, with, in some cases, pretty material misrepresentations. And we've seen some SPVs going around of folks who are fundamentally lying about what shares they have access to, what vehicles they're investing in.
Is that not a financial crime? You are like misrepresenting 100%
to induce 100%
purchase.
It is.
Yeah.
100% it is. And when we've seen it, we've called folks out and said, hey, that's just not true. The most classic of which is where someone says, oh, we have direct access to Anduril primary shares of their last round. There was something going around recently of somebody who was like, we have access to the second close of Anduril Series F raise. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about? There is no second close. The round has been closed for 4 months. Like, this is done. So if what you're saying is like you're buying shares from somebody who did invest, okay, then say that. But that's not what they're saying. What they're making it sound like is just a totally fundamentally different position.
To what extent is the onus not on you for that? So if I take, for example, Nikolai at Revolut.
Yeah.
He has fucking controlled that cap table. Yep. I mean, just watertight.
We've tried.
You've tried.
We've tried. And to a certain extent, you can't totally control, you certainly can't control fraud. like fraud's going to exist. And I can guarantee that someone out there believes that they invested in their former roommate's boyfriend's SPV and owns SpaceX shares or Anduril or OpenAI or whatever else. And actually what they're doing is they're funding that guy's coke habit in the Bahamas or something. Like, guarantee that stuff's happening. And it's like, I can't control that. What we can control is who has direct access to the cap table, who has direct access to Anduril strategy, who has direct access to Anduril financials. And beyond that, it's like we kind of can't control some of it, to be honest.
What specifically has Anduril done to be the breakout success that it is? I asked Trey the same question, and he gave me a great answer, which I'll reveal to you after.
Yeah, you can't tell me ahead of time. That would ruin the surprise. My answer would be twofold. I think first we have, and they're very related. I think first we have unlocked what was a kind of a latent patriotism within the technology and defense sector. I say latent because if you look at the momentum through the kind of the early 2000s into the 2010s, the momentum in the tech sector amongst kind of the zeitgeist, amongst the employee kind of mindset, was not one of patriotism. And to your question, a half hour ago, whatever, like, are the best and brightest going to work at Lockheed, et cetera? No, there was not an interest in working in the defense sector. And I think like Anduril has unlocked that kind of latent talent to wake up and come work on problems that we view as the most important problems in facing the world right now. So we've unlocked that, and then the other half of that kind of card there is also by unlocking a incredible amount of funding and investment into this sector that had also been historically kind of lacking for this kind of segment. And to your point about like, well, isn't this a bad customer? Like, I'm used to winner take all. Like, yeah, that's a lot of investors. I mean, that's a lot of kind of traditional VC style investing where you're thinking about the next ad tech company or the next social media platform or something. And like, cool, I get it. Fine, power to you. That's not this sector. And thus through the 2000s and then into the 2010s, investors weren't investing in this area. And I think that like we were able to both unlock that investor enthusiasm and then pivot that into unlocking this latent kind of patriotism in the tech talent base, and be able to align the two of those on this mission set. And ultimately, like at its absolute core, I know this is going to sound cheesy, but like at its absolute core, like a company is made up of their people. And if we can get the most motivated, the brightest, the hardest working talent to work on these problems, then like we will get good results. So I think like if it's the one thing I had to point to, it's like what made Anduril successful. It's that we've attracted incredibly smart, hardworking geniuses to work on this problem set.
A company is a collection of people. You mentioned kind of bringing that together with the patriotism element.
Yeah. Do you want to like embroider that on a pillow or something? You know, could make a nice like little poster, motivational poster.
The hard question I have for you is the patriotism. There is this image of kind of machoism aligned with defense, war, conflict.
Sure.
What percent of Anduril is women? Respectfully, does it matter?
Yep.
And I'm kind of just tying everything together here. And like, you know, Sean McGuire said, yeah, woke mind virus is the worst thing in society. And actually, we're here to build amazing companies.
So what I think matters, I genuinely, fundamentally do not believe the statistics matter. I think what matters is that I want, and I work very hard every day to make this so, I want every Andurilian to wake up in the morning, whether they're male, female, white, black, Latino, Asian, whatever. I want them to wake up every morning and feel excited to come to work. I want them to feel accepted. I want them to feel motivated. I want them to feel like this is a good career decision for them. I want them to feel financially rewarded. And I want them to ultimately believe in the long-term vision of what we're building here. And regardless of what they identify as, what boxes they check on a form, fundamentally in my core, I don't give a shit. And I think that like a focus on...
So you're not going to hire for a number?
No, absolutely not. And anybody who tells you that they are, I think I think is misguided.
What percent is women then?
Yeah, not enough, man. Not enough. We're about, I think, like 18%, 20%, something like that.
18 to 20% women?
Something in that range. Yeah.
Pretty good.
That's funny. Yeah, it's more than you might think.
I think if you look at the average venture portfolio, honestly, it's probably 5%.
You think so?
Where
Total employees?
No, I'm saying where a CEO is the woman.
Or a CEO is the woman, yeah.
Where the CEO. Co-founder's the bullshit one
Yeah.
we can all get away with.
Yeah.
CEO woman, less than 5%.
Yeah, I think it's probably right.
This audience, 85% man.
Oh, interesting.
Crushing
interesting.
it. Yeah, well done.
It's because of the workout shorts you've got there.
That's it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's your macho vibe, Harry. That's what it is.
Thank you. So Trey actually said the reason why you've been successful is the composition of leaders that you have in the firm, which is able to be incredible execution in you, incredible product mind in Palmer, fundraising ability in Trey, ability to sell into government as well in Brian and Trey. Very different skill sets. And there are a lot of defense companies where you have one of them and not any of the others, and that is not enough.
Agreed.
Which leads me to my other question, which is we're seeing a fuck ton of spending in defense in terms of venture investments.
Yeah.
What happens to all these venture investments in defense companies?
I mean, I think it's kind of a complicated question. I think ultimately I'm a little nervous about a lot of these companies kind of getting over their skis and then getting one or two fundraisers under them and then realizing it's a lot harder than it looks on paper, and ultimately struggling and probably imploding.
As a venture investor contemplating investing in the market, what should I know that I don't know?
Well, you should know that the Anduril of X is going to be Anduril, and that your best bet's probably buying as many Anduril shares as you can. Beyond that, I think what you should know is that execution and delivery and actually winning these contracts, winning these long-term programs of record is incredibly complicated and fraught with incredibly complex regulations, compliance, kind of accreditation. Like there's this whole world of very messy kind of back office stuff that is admittedly not sexy. It admittedly doesn't make great headlines, but saying like, we've got a new missile and it's going to be great, like cool, does not a successful missile program make, and there's a huge gap there. So as a new investor to the segment, first of all, I would say you're unlikely to drive venture style returns by being kind of consensus, but like beyond that, I would say truly spend the time to appreciate the complexities of the appropriations process, the budget process, the awarding and winning and supporting and delivering of these.
Because we're seeing like defense funds being created.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is not an asset class in itself to generate.
Shouldn't be, no.
No. You agree with me?
I agree. Absolutely. As a component of a diversified defense sort of investment within a broader diversified portfolio.
Totally makes sense that. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you think of Helsing?
We love them. Like, good relationship with them. I hope they succeed. We've talked with them a couple of times about potential collaborations. We'll see where they end up.
We mentioned the immense number of startups getting funded.
Yep.
Acquisitions? How do you think about acquisition strategy?
Yeah, we've been pretty successful with acquisitions.
You were in Australia.
I was.
That was when we first met.
Yes.
Yeah, you were like, I was like, you in SF? This is incredibly late for you. And you're like, no, I'm in Sydney.
Yeah, was in Australia. Related to an acquisition, actually. So we've had pretty good success with acquisitions. So kind of a little atypical for a company at our age. The thesis behind our acquisitions is basically that there exists a category of, to your point about, I guess it was Trey's point really, about the kind of skill sets of the founding team and what we're really good at and kind of what we can drive at. There exists a category of these companies where they have a brilliant product mind. They have some interesting technology. They have some interesting core platform, and either they haven't quite figured out the government relations, sales, go-to-market engine, like they haven't quite gotten there, or they haven't quite solved the kind of like back office proposals into contracting, into compliance, into security clearances, into kind of supply chain management, and like all of that kind of like complex, admittedly not that fun kind of back office pieces, both of which we as a company happen to be like really fucking good at. So we find these companies, and like the why I was in Australia was related to this company we acquired based out of Boston called Dive Technologies. They make a robotic submarine, an autonomous submarine. We sold a variant of that submarine to the Royal Australian Navy on this development program, and we had to hire an entirely new team, start up a whole new office in Sydney. So I took my family over for about 18 months to kind of launch that. We've got about 125, 130 employees in Sydney now, something thereabouts. So we've taken that kind of approach to that Dive kind of mentality where they had a very interesting submarine design. It was still pretty early. They didn't have a ton of revenue. They didn't have a ton of customers, but like the technology itself is incredibly, incredibly cool, incredibly compelling. We mix that with our kind of customer knowledge, our intimate kind of customer engagement. And we know that the Navy, both the US Navy, the UK Navy, and the Australian Navy want to have more autonomous kind of seafaring capability. We can kind of marry the two of those together and say there's something here. But the Dive team at the time didn't have that kind of whole go-to-market kind of support engine there. So we say, hey, let's take that platform, let's bolt it alongside both our Lattice platform for kind of a command and control kind of communication side of running a robot with the go-to-market engine that we've already built, and magic can happen, and magic has happened. We've taken that, we've applied it to a few other acquisitions, and that's kind of generally the approach that we've seen work. It's also worth noting most of our acquisitions, almost all of them, have not been venture-backed. They've been sort of bootstrapped and ground up started. So it's kind of a little bit of a different mentality.
You mentioned taking your family and moving to Australia.
Yeah.
I spoke to Brian, I spoke to Trey, I spoke to so many. They said you're an execution machine.
Yeah.
What do you do that's non-obvious that allows you to be so efficient at what you do? I see it, I mean this in the nice way, I see it in like your physique. Like your physique is like the embodiment of execution.
Yeah. I mean,
mine is the embodiment of Europe.
That's funny. It's kind of an interesting question. I think I'm kind of always moving. I'm always glued to my phones, much to the frustration of my wife at times. I'll often be working on 2 or sometimes 3 things at the same time, and I'm just consistently trying to both make quick decisions, communicate those decisions, and then empower people to execute on them is like part 1. Part 2 is constantly learning. So I'm like constantly consuming, whether that's podcasts, whether that's audiobooks, whether that's new technical books. Like I'm constantly trying to just expand my knowledge of the world and of the kind of broader tech and defense ecosystem. And then the third piece I would say is that I think I have a pretty good eye for talent, and I have a pretty good eye for the types of folks who kind of have that perfectionist mindset that I do.
What time do you get up in the morning?
About 5:30.
When do you gym?
Right then.
Right then?
Yeah.
Kids get up at 7?
Yeah, thereabouts.
Okay. So
yeah, I don't see my kids in the morning usually. So usually I'm at the office. We have a gym at the office. So usually I go there, work out at the office, work all day, and then get home and do story time and bedtime with my kids at night.
Do you think it's bullshit to think that you can have it all? Like,
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody who puts that together and tries to convince you that you can have everything you possibly want in life with no sacrifices is lying to you. Of course there are sacrifices.
What have you missed or sacrificed that you think about most?
There's not much, man. There's not much, to be honest. I think if I had more time, I would spend more time with my kids. Like, you don't get them at this age very often. For very long. Very often is a bad phrase. You don't get them at this age for very long. And they're really fun. They're really, really good kids. They bring me a lot of joy in life.
What's the secret to a happy marriage and being incredibly busy?
Is 2 things. First is, both of them are going to sound pretty cheesy. First is choosing your life partner very, 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 very carefully. And I think having it goes to point 2, very clear communication about expectations, about responsibilities, about timelines, about goals. And if fundamentally relationships fall apart when some of those things don't happen, So if I'm consistently making promises to my wife, and she's amazing and great, if I'm consistently making promises about where I'll be, or I'll take the kids here, or I'll get this thing done, or I'll handle this problem, and then I'm consistently not, then she will understandably get frustrated. And the reverse is also true. And I find that this applies to business as well. Without clear communication about, yes, I will take care of that, and actually doing it and doing it to a high level, frustration just builds over time. And over time, that can turn in from minor frustration into major frustration into this isn't working for me kind of breaks.
Do you agree never go to sleep angry?
No, actually. I actually don't. I think also applies to business, but especially for me, and you talk to enough of my friends, this has surely been said. Like I can have I can take things personally that aren't necessarily intended personally, and I can have an overly emotional reaction to things that may not deserve such an emotional reaction. With the benefit of time, a little bit of benefit of self-reflection, I think it puts you in a position to have a more thoughtful, clearer communication that isn't so fueled by emotion. And I think having an argument at dinner that turns into a argument after bedtime, that turns into a let's stay up all night and argue about it, I actually think is like not actually that healthy. Just getting to a place where you say like, look, we're both frustrated, let's talk through this tomorrow, I actually think it's totally fine. Provided you actually do. I think what the point of the saying is it's like
don't let
things fester. Yeah, if you let things fester for weeks or for months, then yeah, of course you're going to drive real frustration, and that will ultimately be pretty net negative to a relationship. But,
Final one before we do a quick fire. Before when we were chatting, I said, a big thought that I've had is, 10 years ago I could have moved to the Valley, and I didn't. Yep. And you kind of vociferously and passionately said that, no, you should have done, and why not now?
Yep.
What, can you just unpack why you reacted like that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think in your business, your mandate is to find the brightest folks working on the most emerging problems that aren't going to see market for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and aren't going to be successes until 10 years. And I think fundamentally what that means is you should be closest to where, I'm turning into like old guy advice guy over here, sure. But like you should be closest to where the nexus of that talent is. And I think ultimately in the technology sector, this isn't to say that there aren't exceptions. Of course there are. I can't wait for the tweet responses. But like the highest concentration of talent working on what I think is going to be the next generation of problems that the world faces, and the next generation of kind of generational segment-defining companies. A lot of them are in California, man.
Do you think venture has lost its way then? Because you just said they're not going to see market for 2 to 3 years. We have in the last decade been brought up on the lean startup methodology, get product in the hands of customers, focus on SMB accounting tools and e-commerce optimization, cart abandonment products. Has venture lost its way, focusing on the wrong things?
I think it's finding its way back. I do think venture lost its way. And in pursuit of that kind of that early fad, that next kind of quick trend, that next kind of quick pop, and of course everybody and I get the incentives. I totally get the incentives. Being in the sexiest company that helps you raise the next fund, that helps you get the next logo on your page, that helps you generate kind of the LP enthusiasm. I totally get the dynamics, but nonetheless, I think that the enduring companies, the companies with real moats, that I think are going to be around for a long time, ultimately have real technological kind of innovations at the heart of them.
The thing that worries me, though, is clean tech was a fucking horrible venture performance in 2005, 2006.
Yep, almost took out a couple of iconic VCs, right?
Almost took out a couple. And my point of saying that is just it is a very different style of investing, analyzing a fintech procurement platform versus analyzing Anduril. And we have a generation of investors that are very skilled and talented at the SaaS investing, but that is a very different CapEx structure, company build to what we're used to. Are we going to see, is this generation of venture investors equipped for that next generation?
implicit in your question is a assumption that VCs and investors will use the same templates from prior investments on to new investments, which I think like VCs are generally pretty smart. Like they're generally pretty well educated. They're generally able to learn new things pretty quickly. Else, like they wouldn't succeed in venture. They wouldn't get to partner status at these firms. So like, I think we're going to see a different mindset. I think some of them are going to be good at it. A lot of them won't. But that's just like any other kind of evolution in the Valley, any other kind of evolution in the sector. So, yeah, I think it's going to be tough times for some of them. But overall, I'm optimistic. Overall, I'm excited for kind of the enthusiasm and all the money pouring into the sector.
Are you ready for a series of unfair questions that will make you uncomfortable?
I don't think they will, but okay.
You haven't heard all of them yet. If you were to raise again from one investor, who would you take?
Founders Fund. Hands down, absolutely every time.
Why?
It's literally in the name of the fund, and their job is to make bets on the people. And throughout their history, this is demonstrated with their relationship with Anduril as well, demonstrated with their relationship with me personally. Like they are a ride or die, stand by their founders kind of organization. And a lot of VCs will say that they are. A lot of VCs will make that claim. And then actually when push comes to shove, they're not.
Can you share an anecdote of when they have done a ride or die for you?
They have gone to bat for us in numerous times with VCs who were either uncomfortable with and these are in the early days, post Ukraine, all of this has changed. You didn't ask me those questions, by the way, but like, hey, that's fine. In the early days when people were very uncomfortable with the ethics of defense, especially in a Trump administration. If you remember at the time, like Trump had just won, it was very controversial in the Valley at least. And there was this like, can we trust them? What about defense? We don't know. There's like this ethical kind of quandary that a lot of VCs are struggling with. And Singerman himself personally, like multiple times went to bat for us and said, you're absolutely insane. These are good folks with good ethics and good morals, and this is absolutely technology the world needs. You have to get involved, and has like personally gone to bat for us and helped us. So like that means a lot to us to stand by us. And any list of top tier VCs, et cetera, people, they publish the list that doesn't include Founders Fund at the top is a laughable list.
What have you changed your mind on in the last 12 months?
I have changed my mind on the importance of business systems and the kind of nitty-gritty weeds of business systems integrating together, leading to an effective manufacturing process. And happy to go into as much incredibly boring detail. Your stats on the podcast listening, this is when people are going to turn it off, right here. But there's a lot of very important kind of guts that go into, like when Tommy Technician comes to work and he beeps his badge in at his workstation, what is he seeing? Like, what is he building today? And like the guts behind that are incredibly complicated and incredibly complex and matter a lot. And over the last 12 months, I mean, I mentioned my kind of bad decision 18-ish months ago to kind of starve the G&A functions of the company a little bit. Over the last 12 months, I've seen like, oh man, that stuff matters way more than I thought it would have. And we've since corrected, like we're working on it. We've got some pretty interesting stuff cooking. Like we're about to announce a pretty exciting partnership in the next few weeks here. But
gosh, your wife has a very stimulating dinner discussion, doesn't she? My word.
Yeah, let me tell you about ERP integrations.
Darling,
what'd you work on today? I'm like, Salesforce APIs.
God. In the morning I got sanctioned by China, and then do you want to let me tell you about the future of ERP? Christ, can I go back to the other college guy?
Exactly.
Biggest lesson from working with Peter Thiel. You were Mithril before.
Biggest lesson from Peter is that there's no alpha in consensus. And like Peter is like famously a contrarian, et cetera. And the point is not, I think this gets like misunderstood or misreported. Like the point is not to just be like cantankerous or not to be disagreeable. It's not at all the point. The point is that like if everyone agrees, if the consensus is X, then there's no alpha in X because like by definition you are just going to perform exactly as well as literally everybody else is. So the alpha, the actual interesting signal, the investable signal, the differentiated signal is in being contrarian. It's very easy to say that. It's very easy to read that. It's very easy to be like, oh yeah, I totally get it. Incredibly hard to implement in practice.
If that were the case, would you be not investing in defense now, though? Because everyone sees defense as a very investable opportunity.
I mean, I think I would not be investing in defense at some of the valuations that these early stage companies are pulling down, because I think there's a sort of a view of a venture return in some of these companies that I think is going to be pretty hard to achieve.
Is Anduril overpriced today?
I don't think so. I think Anduril's underpriced today.
What's it, 15 billion?
14 billion in the last round. Who's counting?
14 billion.
Yeah, 14 posts in the last round. Yeah.
Okay, so 14 posts in the last round. What does it take for Anduril to be 100 billion?
I think a few things have to happen. It's worth noting 100 would put us well within the top 10, if not top 5 of defense contractors in the U.S. I think really what it takes, and this is going to sound kind of silly, kind of pithy, is full scale production, massive scale production of robot planes, robot subs, more drones, more missiles, more everything, and we've got a lot of building, a lot of investment to make there. But I think that's really what it's going to take, and then really just continued operational excellence and continued delivery. It's hard.
I can't believe I'm going to ask this kind of Joe Rogan-esque question, but I'm just too intrigued. How realistic is the robo-dog weaponized with guns as the future of war? Is that possible, or am I being completely
It's very Joe Rogan of you. Robo-dogs, color me skeptical. Robot on robot warfare, I think is pretty likely. I think we're kind of already seeing it. Like whether that's the...
If that is the case, surely we are like destined to win. I mean this in the nicest way. But if you're fighting, in the hills of Afghanistan, and we have, 50 robo dogs or robo planes or whatever robo we choose to have, and you've got, local militia or whatever it is, it's not a fair fight, is it?
If that's how you think the future of warfare will play out, then no, it's not a fair fight. I don't think that's how the future of warfare is going to play out.
How does the future of warfare play out?
I think that we're seeing this in the conflict in Azerbaijan. In 2020, I think we're seeing it play out in Ukraine right now, and I think we're seeing it play out with Iranian missiles that they're lobbing at Israel from Western Iran. The way it's playing out right now is that you think about it as like a kind of an indigenous kind of like local tribal kind of warfare. That's not what it is. What it is that these countries, these adversaries, can make these drones in massive quantities for incredibly cheaply. So like this Iranian Shahed missile, it's one of the missiles they mostly use, goes pretty slow. It's just a drone. They can make it for in the neighborhood of $50,000, and it's just incredibly cheap for these missiles. Then they'll either give them to the Russians, then the Russians will shoot them at the Ukrainians, or they'll just shoot them at Israel from Iran. Very cheap. Then it takes us a $4 million Patriot missile to intercept one of those, or at best, a $1 million-ish Iris missile that made by Saab. Like, those missiles are way more expensive. So if you play out and you're like, what is their manufacturing capability of those $50,000 drones? Very, 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 very high. And then, okay, we have to then launch either our own very expensive missiles, our own very expensive planes to then go fly up behind and shoot these things down. And like ultimately that kind of cost curve and that production curve is not in our favor. And if you look at some of the kind of statistics out of Ukraine, and I can send some of these to you after the show, they're incredibly scary of the amount of munitions that get expended in the first couple of weeks of one of these nation-on-nation conflicts. And the U.S. right now does not have the production capacity, nor does the U.K., nor does Australia, kind of the West at large, to make enough munitions to fully equip a prolonged nation-on-nation conflict. So if you think that the war looks like what it did in Afghanistan, then yeah, of course, drones and technology will make it kind of an imbalanced, unfair fight. I don't think that's what it's going to look like, though. I think what you're going to see is like Iranian agitators equipping those forces with these very cheap drones in large quantities in a way that then like we simply can't afford to defend ourselves from in the long run. That's where it's going to get super interesting. So our whole thesis is about driving down the cost and driving up the production rates of those various kind of defense mechanisms and munitions in order to kind of both keep up with and ultimately outcompete some of those adversaries.
That's fascinating. I hadn't thought, understood it in that perspective. Sean Maguire said on the show, with that in mind, that Iran is the greatest evil. Do you agree?
Yes and no. I think greatest evil, probably yes. Most complex and difficult adversary for the West, I would say no.
Who is?
China, hands down.
Why?
I think the mindset of the PRC, I think their approach to basic human rights, I think their conducting of an ongoing genocide with their Uyghur population, I think their approach to free speech, to political assembly, to religious freedom are fundamentally antithetical to how the West values human life and how we think about human rights and what we're on this earth to ultimately do. Fundamentally antithetical. And I think if you look at both the sheer population, it's a very big country, you look at their production capacity, a lot. You look at their control of the supply chains that we already talked about earlier. And then you put that together with what I view has been a pretty well demonstrated, at least ambition for kind of empire building, whether that's through Belt and Road in Africa, whether that's through invading Taiwan. Like, if you look at them in increasing their influence on the global sphere.
Also, their control of African mineral supply is immense. You spoke about it earlier in terms of the second, third, and fourth, and I was just actually thinking, like, when you look at their ownership of cobalt, for example.
Totally.
Worrying.
Very worrying, right? So it's like, so I think like,
and the lack of strategic expenditure that the West have had, that they have had immensely strategic expenditure in terms of their acquisition of mineral supply chains.
Yep, it's terrifying, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. This is more my point.
What worries me immensely is not actually wealth inequality; it's knowledge inequality. Because it's the fact that actually, I think 0.1% of people would even know what cobalt is, let alone where it's from, who owns it, and how it's impacted in global supply chains. I worry about that.
I do too. So I think to your question about Sean, is it the most evil? It's like, yeah, I think probably, but I think on a global competitive sort of long-term landscape, I think.
Should TikTok be banned in the US?
100% absolutely yesterday, if not years ago.
Because?
Can you get Instagram in China?
No.
Yeah, end of debate.
Is that the right approach?
100% it is. Absolutely 100% it is.
Like, they ban it, so we ban it.
No, I think it's more complex than that. I think it's that what you are mainstreaming into the central cortex of the American psyche, especially our youth, especially our teenagers, our college age youth, like you're mainlining a certain type of message to them. And I think like there are parallels where it's like if you look at what Twitter, now X, was pre and post Elon's purchasing, like it's a different tone, it's a different type of thing. They're promoting different content. They would say not promoting some content. So like you can see in the zeitgeist how what content is getting promoted through different social media. You see the same thing on Instagram. Can affect the psyche of a population. And what we are willingly doing is we are willingly letting a strategic adversary control the knobs on what gets mainlined into the psyche of our youth. And if you don't think that that has long-term strategic implications for the motivation, for the ambition, for the direction of a country, then man, I don't know what to tell you. But like, if they're going to have their finger on the scale and on the knob, control the knob of what's being consumed by the overwhelming majority of our citizens, yeah, we shouldn't let it.
Do you think it is over-exaggerated the extent to which traditional media is bias, a weapon of the existing infrastructure? Elon has been very clear about this.
Your point, though, around traditional media bias and that messaging is 100% accurate. And I think the kind of the democratization of information, like, of course there are pitfalls. Of course there are challenges around misinformation. I listened to your interview with Owen at Intercom and talking about free speech and what does it mean and all of that. Like, and it was a fascinating conversation. But I don't think, to answer your question concretely, I don't think it's overstated. If anything, I think it's understated.
Did you take my side or his side in that?
His side.
Seriously?
I'm an American. Of course I took his side.
So I can say a joke, it incites mass violence, and that's okay because, haha, it was a joke. You took it wrongly.
Do you believe that jokes incite mass violence?
It depends on your perception of what is funny and what's not funny.
Yeah. Who decides? Do you decide? Are you the arbiter of what was a funny joke that got a laugh versus an unfunny joke that got a boo?
Someone has to be.
Who is that? Who elects that person?
I think it's the nation. I think you have to have a government and a police force that will determine that.
Are you proposing that we have a board that if you want to make a joke you have to run your joke by the board?
But do you know
comedy being famously susceptible to groupthink and group approval?
But if we took the example that I gave, which is 10 people of a certain race with machetes around one person in the middle of another race with a caption on it.
Yep.
That is funny to some people in certain demographics, communities, sure. And that could incite violence in retribution to that leads to someone dying in another community. Like, go and say to that family, it's a joke, ha ha ha.
Yeah, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that, like, having a sort of preemptive control over what opinions, what political positions, what proposals are allowed to be said is an incredibly dangerous path to go down, and the who gets to decide is really at the core of this. So it's like, should that person who made that joke be allowed to make that joke? Absolutely, they should be allowed to make that joke. Does that mean there should be no consequences? Sure, there can be consequences. There can be reputational consequences. There can be lawsuits. There are liabilities. There are all sorts of things that can play out. My point is that it shouldn't be the job of the state to say, you are allowed to say this, you are not allowed to say that. That has never in human history ended well.
But it will ultimately, with all the repercussions you just gave, there will ultimately be an arbiter of justice on whether that was right or wrong. I say a joke, you sue me, and there's a lawsuit about it. There will be an arbiter on that lawsuit.
There'll be arguments. There'll be an argument in court. There'll be a jury that will decide whether it crossed into some threshold. And this isn't to say like that we have obviously different approaches to freedom of speech in this country and in the U.S., but like there do exist a very well-established set of laws and practices around what is and is not protected speech, whether it's parody, whether it's not. Like these laws do exist. My point is in the meta saying like this is an allowable opinion, this is an acceptable opinion versus it's not. It's an incredibly dangerous position to be in. And you have to look no further than the debate and the dialogue around COVID post kind of in those first few months around when the pandemic really took the world over. And social media platforms, Google's, the mass media, sort of mainstream television and radio wouldn't talk even a little bit about possible alternative theories. It was wild, totally wild in retrospect. And like actually some of those alternative theories turned out to be true. And it's like that is a living example of where this kind of mindset goes sideways.
Meshing two things together, Delian at Founders Fund and Europe. He said on the show, Europe is a third world country. And I mean, Keith Rabois has been like, you're what? What is that? Like,
yeah.
Just this massive, like, terribly underperforming countries.
Yeah.
Do you look at Europe honestly today and go, that's a bleak future?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting and very challenging structural issues facing Europe. And I think fundamentally, again, this is coming from a very, very American perspective, there's an ambition. There is a seeking and working towards a better, brighter future that feels to be almost kind of complacently lacking from a large portion of Europe. And I know you said it yourself here in the UK as well. And I think there's an element of like, if we want a brighter future, we have to build it. And that spirit, that drive, I worry that Europe's kind of lost their spark on that front. I don't view it as bleakly as those guys do. Granted, it's like they're kind of in the business of
hot takes,
and making headlines and spicy tweets and whatnot. I view it through a more pragmatist lens. That's like, is there something here worth defending? Is there a future worth building towards? And absolutely, of course there is. I just I hope Europe gets there.
Grossly unfair of you, Delian saying I respect you less if you do not have kids. It's not a hot take. I saw that one. I was like, oh.
There was one Somebody tweeted recently that was like, you shouldn't be allowed to vote if you don't have kids or something. And I was like,
Oh, there have been a few. Yeah. There's some where I look at them and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not your comms team.
Yeah.
Final one.
Take that one back.
What have we not discussed that we should have discussed? Or what question are you not asked that you should be asked?
The one I'm not often asked about is impact. And you've talked a little bit about this with a couple of your other interviews. Impact of early life and childhood on one's psyche and one's approach to the world. We get asked all the time about kind of the usual questions of AI and ethics, and of course you can't go through any media engagement without talking about President Trump. All of those things, those are pretty well trodden, but never really get asked about the sort of the other side, the personal side, the family side, the early childhood side.
What was your most painful early childhood moment that shaped you most?
So I grew up in the Philadelphia suburbs, and we're very rabid sports fans. We have a very deserved reputation of being passionate about our sports. But I grew up in Philadelphia and remember constant friction between my parents around money. Always, there's just never enough money. There's always instability, and I don't want to make it like paint a picture of some sort of Oliver Twist here kind of begging for food kind of situation. It wasn't that bleak, but I remember a consistent kind of friction around the direction of the family and whether there was enough money or where the next paycheck's coming from or whether we'd be able to make the bill payments. And I remember bill collectors. I remember like mortgage foreclosure notices. Like I remember a lot of that kind of friction, and then observing that friction on the relationship between my mother and my father. And I remember very clearly this moment of one of these kind of arguments that kind of went sideways. It got a little ugly. And I remember sitting in my room, I was like 14, thinking like, not me. Like this is not going to be me. This is not going to be my family. This is not going to be my kids. Like nope. And then that drove me through my early childhood career, that drove me through college, that drove me through my early career at Palantir. This motivation of just like, that is not going to be the how I live my life with my kids. Like I'm going to be in a position where we're not worrying about those things.
Does money make you happy?
No, of course not. No, anybody who tells you money makes them happy is lying.
Really?
I think money buys you the opportunity to explore the world, to explore different interests, to have a different relationship to the world. Money in and of itself, no, of course that doesn't make you happy. You fill a swimming pool with cash and swim through it. That's not going to make you happy. What's going to make you happy is good relationships, good friends, good experiences.
You remember that. I remember my grandparents using everything and going and staying with them in literally like one room house.
Yeah, sure.
And it's so bad that actually, fuck, dude, I have a lovely massive bed in a beautiful apartment now that overlooks the park. And yeah, times are tough in whatever you lose a deal with. They're not really that tough.
Who do you spend your time with?
Mother.
Yeah. Did money buy her?
Yes, a lot of Chanel. And she would spend time with my brother if it wasn't for the Chanel.
That's not true, and you know it.
It is. He's much more amiable.
That might be true. That might be true. No, but my point is like.
Did you think money would make you happy?
Of course.
And then it didn't.
Yes.
Was that a hard moment?
I'll tell you an anecdote. Growing up, I had this fascination, still do, with fancy fast cars, and I was one of those kids with the car posters on the walls, and my desktop background was a fancy Ferrari, etc. And I had this dream, and like my dream car, and you'll chuckle because it kind of sort of shows my ambition at the time. My dream car was an M3 coupe, this 6-speed, really cool like BMW M3, and it's kind of this like road car, but kind of a race car, and like I could use it, but also it's super fast, super cool. And I had this vision, and then early in my Palantir career, saved up some money, sold a little bit of secondary, had some good cash, and I was like, yeah, I should gonna get that car, and then I got it, and it was like, did this awesome experience, did the European delivery, which I strongly encourage, by the way, it's really dope. And then got the car, went back home, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm like just back to work again, like going out to dinner with my friends, I guess. And it was like that kind of realization that, to your point, like not quite cheated, disappointed maybe is like a better word, where it was like, oh, this doesn't actually bring me happiness. This doesn't bring me contentment. This doesn't bring me fulfillment. Like what I think money does is I think it allows you some freedom to explore who you really are, what really makes you tick, what really brings you joy, what really is rewarding for you. And ultimately, like my quip about who do you spend your time with is like, that's really what life's about. And for me, granted, you're about a decade younger than me, but like for me, like that's about
How much
my
money do you
family
need to
and
feel
my
comfortable?
kids. Well, I don't know. It's different for every person. It's different in every geography. I'm not going to put a number to it, but like
You're right. It is different in every geo.
Yeah, very, very different. I mean, like you could take $500,000 and go live in many parts of the world and live very well, living off the interest on that and be quite comfortable. And I know people who are quite comfortable living in a, one bedroom apartment and they surf every day. Like that's totally fine. I don't think there's a number at which it's like, that's the number you need. I don't think it's that simple. I think it's really about like, what is it that's rewarding for you? What is it that makes you happy, that drives you on kind of a more philosophical, spiritual level? And finding that is one of life's great challenges, and ultimately, in my experience at least, somewhat disconnected from the bank account balance.
Final one. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I often think about this.
If failure was completely impossible, completely off, I'd repatriate all semiconductor fabrication. I'd start a company doing that.
Is Anduril your last company?
I think probably. I mean, we're all in this for the long haul. I think probably. We're going to ring the bell one day, and then we're going to build a massively successful publicly traded company. And like, yeah, it's probably my last. I don't know. I'm getting old. I'm getting tired. I don't know.
Dude,
we'll see.
I've so loved doing this. It's conversations like this which make me love what I do.
Yeah,
really,
it's been really fun.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.